Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to learn about habitat. So, how to increase and help or enhance chinchilla habitat. And in order to do that, we first need to know what is the habitat. And then we're going to try and figure out how to grow what they need and plant it and protect it. So by increasing the habitat and enhancing the habitat, we're going to try and help this endangered animals population grow and increase and hopefully get it out of that endangered category. Once again, our lecture series are paid for by ZGAP, or funded, and the Tulsa Zoo. ZGAP is a group of German zoos committed to conservation, and the Tulsa Zoo is in the U.S. They've been funding us for decades. Between the two of them, probably 30 years of funding. Some of that's overlapping, but they do this for projects all over the world. It's important to support zoos like this that help and enhance conservation and the saving of species. So our first part about trying to define the chinchilla habitat is figuring out what lives, or what is where they are, what do they need to live. And we're going to do this by using a standard trapping grid. We're going to stake these out with little pieces of wood hammered into the ground, is what I've done at each spot. So at A1, I've put a little stake in there. It's red it's painted red on the top with an A and a 1 on it. It's hammered into the ground. That's A1. 15 meters to each side of that, I'm going to add another stake until I get 7 meters, or 7 stations by 7 stations. Each is 15 meters apart. This ends up being just over a hectare in area. I think it's 1.1 hectares, because we're going to also take into account the 15 meters either direction of this as the boundary. And we're going to label them A through G and 1 through 7. Now, an important thing that to try and remember is, if you're going to put A1 here, when you go over to another mountain further down the mountain, don't start A1 over here and go this way. Start A1 here and go the same direction. I might have done that once. Put A1 over here. This is actually the southwest corner. And on another mountain, it's in my southeast corner. So I've messed that up in one study plot. It didn't make a difference over time, but you want to try and be uniform in where you're placing these. So the first thing we're going to do is find out who's at each of those spots. Who's living at A1, A2, A3, and who else is living there. And the only way that we can do this with chinchillas, because we couldn't live trap, we didn't have permission, is we made something called smoke cards. And what it is, we had them made in the local town from sheets of metal roofing, zinc roofing, cut into squares, and then had the welder put a carbon film on that by just heating the metal, and it leaves a carbon, like a smoke, a burn mark. It looks like the entire card's black at that point. And then when the animals hop over it, the black is lifted onto their feet and it leaves a footprint. We leave those in at each spot for 24 hours. So we put them out one day, the next day at the same time we go and collect them. And this is what we end up with, was we could see that these are chinchilla tracks. These are their forepaws, these are their hind paws, they hop, that's how it looks. This is Abergone bonetti, they walk or crawl like some of these other ones do, these walk. So they're not in this hopping pattern. If you look up here, you can see like a little thumb print. This is a marsupial, and he's changed his genus, as we talked about in the first lecture. This genus has changed to something or another, I forget now, but sometimes it's Thylamus. And anyways, it's not a mouse at all. It is a little mouse opossum. It's a marsupial, the only marsupial in our area. And then what we did was we made a key out of all the different smoke tracks, and this is our key to the different footprints for these small mammals. We made it available to other researchers in other areas where they were also going to try and detect where there were chinchillas. We always share our data as much as possible, unless the people have an ulterior motive, like the mining companies. So now we know where the animals are. Now we want to find out about the vegetation that they need in this habitat of theirs. And we're going to look at the frequency and the abundance of the vegetation and the cover, how much cover is. And we used line intercept methods. So what you do is you take a piece of rope and 2 stakes, and our rope was, I think it was 20 meters in length, yes. And I stood randomly, we selected for our grids where we were going to place these transects, these line intercept transects to collect vegetation. We did 16 of them in this grid. So I'm standing here at the pole with the cord hanging onto it at our point of where we're going to start. And are we going to start which row? And we're going to go left or right to that row. And we're going to go up or down at a 45-degree angle. And we did this to match a prior study. So our results could be comparable to another study that did the exact same thing in chinchilla habitat, see if the habitats changed over time, if it's comparable. The data is comparable because we used the exact same methods. All right, so I'm standing there with the post, and Manuel, who you can't see, is gone 16 meters away from me with the other pole, and that's connected to our rope. And he's trying to, at this moment in time when this picture was taken, get it over the vegetation so that we could have a straight line. So when we do this, you're going to measure everything underneath there, every piece of vegetation underneath of that. If it's a tree, measure how much of the crown goes over that line. And you're going to end up actually with more than 20 meters of vegetation. That's because this vegetation overlaps. Sometimes you'll have a grass down here. And so you're going to have to do some calculations to get the right amount. You're not going to take it. You're not going to have your length is the length of your transect's 20 meters, but there's overlapping vegetation. So your total length of the vegetation in that area is going to be longer than 20 meters because of that overlap. Don't forget the tape measure, because then you're not going to be able to measure anything. We didn't have that issue on this day. So what we did was we ended up with, you'll see here, grade 1 and grade 2. This is rumpiato. It's a plant that the chinchillas like to eat the seeds of. So we have these different amounts of vegetation and plants. Rumpiato is Brigesia, I guess. So in grade 1 and grade 2, this is how much we had. Jaime did the same type of study, the exact same methods. And in his grids, he had a comparable amount there. Our first grid where there's chinchillas, there are chinchillas in both of these grids that we're comparing here. It didn't have very much, but we think that this plant's important. I mean, it's in 3 of the colonies. So that's a plant we probably want to focus on when we go to make habitat. Here, this plant here, it's a wild papaya. It's only in 1 of our grids. It's not in the other 2. So that plant probably isn't as important to chinchillas, right? And let's see, what else do we have here? Let's find something that I know. Where is Cordia? Cordia. We have it in 2 of our grids. He has it in only 1 of his. We do plant a lot of that. And here's another thing that we had a bunch of in both of our grids he didn't have, but Jaime did say in his grids, Jaime Jimenez is the person that did this study, the prior study. His chinchillas were in more rock outcroppings, and ours are here actually living underground under this plant and underneath the puyas. Where's puya? I don't know. So, well, this is alphabetical. Puyas. Ours has a lot more puyas. His chinchillas here were living in between rock crevices. Ours are living underneath the puyas. And so that's another plant we try and focus on based on our results of our transects, our vegetation transects. Now, what we did was we figured out where the animals were by our smoke cards, right? And so we can see there's a chinchilla here, there was a chinchilla here, and a chinchilla here. This is grid 2. And there's a chinchilla here. So, and then we looked at how much cover is at each of these spots. And the way we did that was we took and we looked at 5 meters from that exact spot in a circular circle, a 5-meter radius, and we looked at the dominant species. So what species was the most dominant in that area, and how much cover was in that area. And what we found out was the dominant species here was Carbonillo, Cordia decantra. There's a chinchilla, and it had typical coverage. That means between 20 and 80% ground cover. And what we found was there in no area was a chinchilla in a dense cover. That's because they hop. So they're not going to be in a place where there's lots of cover where they can't hop or see predators. And that way we can look at the other relations to the other animals, what other animals were around. This is a thylamus. This is thylamus, 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 thylamus. There's a chinchilla there. There's a chinchilla here. Here's another thylamus. So, they're living pretty close to each other. And this is just what the biogeography of our trapping grid told us. The next thing we needed to do is, once we figured out what plants they liked, we needed to gather seeds. And when you gather seeds, you want to get seeds from different areas, and you don't want to take all the seeds from one area because that's a food source for an animal. So we gathered lots of Rumpiato seeds because we decided that was a plant important to the chinchillas, and other seeds also. The seed pod that I'm holding, this is a volunteer that was with us from France. We actually stole these seed pods. One day we were driving, we knew where they were. We knew that they were just rotting on the ground. The owners weren't at the area to ask. So we went and grabbed a bunch of them. And this is a plant that in that ancient literature said was really important to chinchillas. And it was that plant, those seed pods dye clothes green. So when they were hunting chinchillas, they were also collecting these seed pods because the royalty and the nobility over in Europe really liked this color green that these seed pods dye your clothes. So we got these plants too. So we're gathering seeds. We take some from different areas. So you get different genetic variation in those seeds. So the plants are adapted to different climate conditions. And then we started growing them in a nursery in 2000. That picture is actually afterwards. For cactuses, we don't collect seeds. We take cuttings. And for these little guys are jumping cactuses. They don't really jump, but you think they do because any disturbance will make it release and it appears to jump. But you can just take one of these little circles and just take it to a new area, make a little indent on the ground, a little tiny indent, and put it there, and it'll take roots because these thorns on these cactuses actually can convert into roots. For the larger cacti, the tower ones, you can take a cutting, you transport it with an I and a Y stick because you don't want to get stuck with the cactuses. Most of them are okay to get stuck with. Big ones are okay. These little ones, they have some kind of rebarb stuff or something. I don't know. Once they get in your skin, they expand and it hurts so much longer. The longer it's in your skin, the harder it is to get it out, and it hurts. This is us in our nursery. So we use shade cloth because we're in a desert and it's just always too hard on the seedlings. Our seed beds are just grown. We just cut out an area in the side of an old abandoned farm. We take topsoil and we mix it with sand and we germinate the seeds in the bottles. So the Coca-Cola company in the local town said that we could have all their used bottles that weren't recyclable. So we got a truckload of those. We cut the top of them. We stuck holes in the bottom of them and on the sides for water to be able to flow out. And this is actually how we now do the plants. We don't grow them ourselves because Marcelo has a nursery where he specializes in this and he does it much better than us. And it cost us probably about the same amount of money, if not cheaper, for him to grow. We take the seeds to him, we send them to him. He grows plants. He also grows other ones that we already needed. So we purchased them from him in Vivero Nativo out of Nogales, which is by Viña del Mar in Chile. It's a 4 or 5 hour drive, depending on how slow you are. He probably gets to our station in 3 hours, not because he's fast, but because I'm a turtle driving. And this is his son. And then we also did some seed balls. This is mud with seeds inside of them that I dispersed into some transects as an experiment to see if we could get seeds to germinate that way. We'll see when I go back. Water access. So we're in a desert, and one issue that we always have is access to water. And we used to have this canal that went right in front of our house, but that was tubed up with our new neighbor. When he arrived in 2008, he tubed up the water and dried up the canal. So we still have the frogs, but probably not as many toads. So one of our issues was, when do we clean the canal? When do we clean our water hole, which we have further up from where we actually get our water now, because we don't want to mess with the tadpoles. And so that's something you need to keep in mind. We have water tanks now, and it's all tubed up, and we have these run up about a kilometer up the mountainside, and actually it goes down lower in one point where our water comes from a natural spring in the mountain. And so we have a little pond dug out there. It's tiny, the size of, not even the size of a car, the size of the boot of a car. And it's a little deep, but what we do is we let the water collect there, and then we put it in a big tube going downhill about 300 meters. And then it goes into a skinnier tube, so it shoots it up by the pressure uphill into our watering tanks. And this watering tank was given to us by another consulting company, we're not a consulting company, and they didn't need it any longer, and so they've given it to us to use, and we have 5 or 6 of these. This is Rigo. He's been with our project since about 2002, more or less, and he is in charge of the station when I'm out of country. I spend about half my life in Chile and half my life out of Chile now. Up behind him is an area we restored in 2001 with the very first plants that we grew from 2000, from our first nursery. We do grow a little bit of stuff, but not anything like what we used to. We used to have a plant nursery with 10,000 plants. Now we might have 100. The rest of it we bring in from Vivero Nativo. It lessens our water demand, and we can use our water for the where we've replanted the plants, the seedlings. So, and here's Neil, a volunteer that's come down a couple of times, and another lady, volunteer. And what we've done is we've done drip irrigation here. This area here is down low, and there's chinchillas up higher on the mountainside up here. And the reason we did this was because the water just rushes down and it doesn't infiltrate, and so we don't have any of this. This used to be like a little wetland wooded area, but because no one's gone back to repair it, it's not come back. We're in a desert and stuff grows really slow. You'll see we have many layers of fencing here. So sometimes you'll see in areas we have individual plants or have a plant protector. This area here, we've completely eliminated the rabbits and the goats from getting into with 2 types. There's 3 types of fencing. This one has 2. Sometimes there's another type here. There's a 3rd type, 7-layer farm fencing, normal farm fencing, chicken wire, and then barbed wire. And this is one of our biggest expenses. Next to personnel, our biggest expense is buying that, and then plants. So here's Tom, a volunteer from the UK, playing with some water. He is silly. These people are from Bulgaria, I believe, or the Ukraine, and this is many years ago. They're filling bottles of water to take uphill where we can't get water to go to in the hose. And this is one of my kids repairing the water hose or connecting 2 hoses to each other so that we can get them to these restoration areas where we're planting seedlings. Our restoration areas are circular because you get more area to perimeter, so it makes the most space. We try and plant the plants ideally in this pizza shape. When we go to restore an area, the first thing we do is you dig a hole. I probably have a picture of how we do that. I'm going to stay on this one for a second, though. You dig a hole, you put some water in, you put some of our back soiling in. That's like just as fertilizer. It's not fertilizer, it's sand and soil and goat droppings. Yeah, then we put the seedling in just below the surface. We back in some soil. We put a plant protector, which is chicken wire cut into a circle. It's 1 meter tall by 1 meter long and then rolled. And then we use cane poles to keep that in, and you fill it in with the dirt. And then we surround the plant with rocks. We call it rock mulch. It's not mulch at all. It's just some big rocks. And what that does is, because it's so cold during the night and so hot during the day, you get condensation. So that's sort of like a natural irrigation water source for the artificial, but water source, it's natural. So, but we've created it by putting these rocks. We fence off areas. So this is a chuso in this lady's hands. I think this is Amanda. Yes, that's Chase and Amanda. And I don't know who that one's. I wasn't there at the time they did this. So it's a big pole. It's a big iron rod. I don't know what it's called in English. It's chuso in Spanish. And you just pry open the ground because it's so compacted. This is an abandoned farm that we've taken on as the station. And this is what it looks like. This is Desiderio, a local man. We hire all local people or work with volunteers, international volunteers, national volunteers, 18 and above, usually, unless there's a parent around. So he's digging holes in a line. This is outside of our station. This is our station. It's just, we keep on expanding how far out we go with the restoration, because what we're trying to do is over on this mountain, on the other side of it, there's chinchillas. And over here on the other side where you can't see, there's chinchillas. And way back there, there's chinchillas. And what we're doing here is trying to create a biological corridor, an area with enough cover and resources for the animals to go from one area to another to disperse those male juveniles. This is that cordia decanter that the chinchillas like. I think I showed a the picture of the flower. I don't know if I pointed that out. It's a white flower. This whole entire area was bare, abandoned. Sometimes you'd get some of these little they're not weeds. Geez, listen to me from that first lecture. They're native. It's just that they grow and they're everywhere. They're not weeds at all. Sorry, I said that. They're really pretty little yellow flowers and they're native and they should be there. But this was all abandoned. It was bare. And now we have this. And these come in with their seeds with the wind. And it's wonderful, actually. All right. So here is Rosa, another person that's been working with us for a couple of years, cutting apart the chicken wire that we buy in rolls. This is Ariana. And this is a lady from Scotland, and I forget her name, but super wonderful woman, stayed with us. And what they're doing is we've had an issue with the hose. It looks like maybe the Chuso hit it and we have a water spill out, but they're digging holes, they're watering plants. And you can see our different layers of fencing and our poles. And these are what cost us the most after, paying a small stipend to Rigo and myself for our project. It's not enough to pay for food monthly for either of us, I would doubt. You can see here that we've marked off the meters and by painting it on rocks, how far we are in. And here's our schedule of planting and how we're going to plant stuff. So the chinchillas are over there and back over there, and we're in the middle of it at our station trying to build this. And we have restoration plots. I think we have like 48 of them throughout the mountains on both sides of the reserve. So this is the next thing we need to do is, here's what it looked like before. And here is a couple of years ago. This is actually in the shape of a chinchilla. We thought it'd be a good educational tool to teach local kids the plant vegetation. Here's our original sleeping shack. Here's our cooking barn. It was made out of all used and recycled material, not the sleeping shack, that was new. So you can see the difference in the vegetation. And what we're looking at is up here on this mountainside here, there's rills of erosion. And we're going to try and cut these over like that, cut in little dig outs, I guess. I don't know what you call them, little trenches, to stop the flow. And hopefully that'll be easier to revegetate and seeds will get caught there and revegetate that side of that mountain better. This is what part of the abandoned field looked like in 2006, and this was in 2015-ish. So we have some stuff growing. We've added some stuff. Anybody can do this at any age. These are kids watering stuff. My children, not just any old kids that I showed up, the adult right there with them. And this is another area that didn't have plants or vegetation. It's on the other side of the station. Another thing we've gone through and done recently, Rigo went through and did this, is where that water is running through on the two mountains. There's chinchillas on both sides, and there's a stream, and that's been, all the vegetation's been cut away basically due to mining in the past and agriculture and human use. He's gone in and put these dams in, which are just sticks, cacti and rocks. And that's just to slow down the water from it just rushing so fast. So we're not trying to stop the water. We want it to go through, but just not as fast, so we can get some more infiltration and hopefully some more plants growing in the area. And this is an area in that further down, a couple 100 meters, that we've restored. So if we look at this, we can also, here's another technique we use. I'm using satellite images to assess what's going on in the vegetation. And during the wet season, we're looking at grass growth. And during the dry season, we're looking at the evergreen stuff that's green year round, not evergreens as in pine trees, but stuff that doesn't lose its leaves. So what we can see from 2014 to 2019, it's a 5-year difference. The satellite images are taken about the same time. And I've done a normalized vegetational index where I've taken one band and multiplied it and divided it by another band, and that infrared and red is the bandwidths that we're using from this is a Landsat image, Landsat 8 from 2019 up high. And what that tells me is that we had a lot more during the wet season in 2014. We've had 5 years of drought up to that point, and there's just hardly any grasses growing or any green vegetation. And then if we look at the dry season, we can see that the restoration areas are actually, the plants are, they're growing. These aren't all restoration areas. This is a huge area. This is the entire chinchilla reserve, is just that area right there. Our station's on the outside of it. But you can see that the evergreen plants are making a comeback, whereas the annuals, the grasses that the chinchillas really like, we've lost a lot of cover in between the years. Over here, we use GIS to map the chinchilla colonies. We compare it to prior maps. So this is a Jimenez mapped them out in the 90s. This was a couple decades later. And what we see is that in red is where the chinchilla colony was. Now it's in green here. It's a lot larger. This is a place where there wasn't any chinchillas in 2001, or in the 90s, there weren't any chinchillas on this side of the mountain here. There were some there, and over there. In 2001, we came in and we restored some vegetation in here, and now there's a huge colony here. It might be a coincidence, it might not. So when we talk about the animals and where they like to live and what were these different techniques, we use micro techniques. I guess you're out there with a trapping grid, you're measuring vegetation, you're using smoke cards. That's on a really fine scale. And then we can go out to these larger scales and we can use different programs and tools with advancements. And this is a, I forget what, Maxent is a program. And what it does is it takes areas where you know there's chinchillas or whatever animal is, point data, and you put it into this program and you tell it what variables you want it to compare against. And so we used elevation and some different climate, and it tells us the most likely areas for these animals to exist. So this is for the short-tailed chinchilla. These are the most likely areas for it to exist, the darker the red. And this is the long-tailed chinchilla, or no, this is the long-tailed chinchilla. This is the short-tailed chinchilla. So these are just different techniques that we've used through time on both different scales to help the chinchillas. And I believe that's the end of our slides. Yes, so thank you.